You're all set, Ann, if you're ready to go.
Great. John, you've given John the ability to share.
I did.
Okay. Well, after our last meeting, John and I have been working on trying to put together a couple of scenarios around how we might consider looking at not only our budget, but for the bid and what we have gleaned so far from our outreach process, what might be the programmatic priorities, and then to suggest a couple of scenarios so that you'll understand some ways where you could go in considering the budget, as well as what we consider to be our next steps. So John and I are going to walk through this presentation to you, and then bear with us, and we'll have some questions and answers at the end, and then discussion of our next steps. So we're gonna tag team this presentation. So John, I'm gonna ask. We'll get started, and then we'll flip back and forth between each of us presenting various slides. So could you next slide, please? John, could you flip to the next slide? Okay, so just as a recap, these are the boundaries that we have discussed so far. In total, there are 420 parcels. So just for those of you who might be newer on the call, every parcel within the district owned by public, private, any property owner within this district is a separate signature that will be needed as we go through the signature campaign. So there are 420 parcels with a total assessed value of, you see, 308 million, and then if you back out those parcels that are either publicly owned or nonprofit or tax exempt, we have 144 plus million in assessed value. And then if we also back out the units of residential housing units that are 4 or under units, that comes down a little bit further to about 138 million. So that's the universe. Next slide, please. And how this breaks out in terms of property types, we have 174 parcels that are commercial, 121 that are publicly owned. That can be everything. That could be a little park, it could be a parklet, a little sliver of land that exists somewhere. It could be City Hall, it could be lots of different things. And then we have 67 parcels that are residential, 38 as nonprofits, and 20 parcels that are industrial. So I'm recommending to you that you consider, and you can do this any number of ways, but my recommendation is that you consider exempting from both your fee structure and the overall mix of your analysis, those properties that are single family, under 4 units, or condominiums from the fee structure. You don't have to do that, and every bid has dealt with their residential properties in a different way, but many of the bids have taken this approach. So you simply remove those from your analysis, and I recommend that you consider doing that. Next slide, please. So this is we thought it'd be helpful to understand these a little bit more. So if you look at the universe of 420 parcels, you see these little arrows that go across. There are 46 parcels that are nonprofit, and then commercial properties they're 174, and they further break down to 8 that are eating and drinking, 32 that are retail and services, and 29 that are banks and general office, how those kind of break down further, and then public, and then residential. You'll see the breakout of those parcels. And John did a job. I think that's very difficult to sort of understand the way that if you just look at a big Excel spreadsheet with a million different zoning categories, we're trying to make this a little bit more readable for you. Next slide. So that's our universe. So now, as I segue to how we think about understanding the universe of parcels that we have, or property owners, and the types of property owners that are in this district, we also want to talk about how do we come up with the budget considerations. So you really need to think about, and I put the slide there. It's pretty apparent, but I'm going to use just a very basic example of hanging baskets. So in order to really figure out what you need in terms of budgets, you need to like, how big is this scope of hanging baskets? Do you want them everywhere? So figuring out the scope of what you want to do in terms of the physical baskets that you want to buy. You know, what kinds of needs do you have in terms of setting them up or hanging them? What needs to be taken into consideration there? How does this get implemented? Is it something the city can do? Or do you have to contract that out? And then what's it take to maintain them so that they look nice through the whole year? And that's how we think about coming up with a number for any project that you're thinking about within this your plan. And how you think about your budget is to really think about the scope, the scaling, the technical needs you have, its implementation, and then how do you maintain those projects over the course of the year. Next slide, please. So we talked about this before, that it's kind of a two-way street. You know, your program it should drive the budget rather than the fee alone determining the resources that are available to support the programming you want. And it's kind of, you meet in the middle. You try to figure out what's reasonable from your fees, what you need to have happen and want to have happen, and what does that budget look like. And then the next slide, please. And then what are the things that, and what are the other resources that can come to the table? So as we have gone through this engagement process, we've kind of come up with, I have asked the question of all of the focus groups and others of what do you have as your vision? You know, and lots of times people talked about clean, safe, and welcoming. We heard that from, other conversations we had, that as a basis, this district needs to feel clean and safe and then be welcoming, so that there's enough reasons for people to come. There's enough reasons for businesses to want to invest in this area, or to attract workers, residents, businesses, investors, and so forth. We can slip out these slides. These are just sort of placeholders that talks about how do other bids are thinking about it. In Amherst, they talk about experience the downtown. They wanted to create a sense of liveliness and vitality. Next slide. So what we have identified so far in terms of the things that you really said you wanted to do is to make the emphasis on clean and safe, however that's approached, through ambassadors, through cleaning services, through other activities that activations that make this destination feel cleaner and safer. Talked about maybe one strategy around this is cultural placemaking. Like, how do you make some physical improvements to create more opportunities for people to gather? How do you look at the programming? Using your arts community and your cultural community. How do you market this district? How do we enhance the streetscape and add on some beautification tactics? And then how this programmatically, how advocacy and the role that advocacy plays in your programmatic details of your plan. And advocacy doesn't necessarily have a dollar amount per se attached to your budget, but it's an important programmatic element that you have expressed that you want to consider. Next slide. So how do we think about this budget? So the bid fees are one aspect of how this budget typically would come together for any bid, and including what we see here. So the opportunity and the hope is that those bid fees are leveraged. So and because bids are set up as 501c3s, this unlocks a window to apply for grants, to look for sponsorships, to have media partners. If there's an opportunity for the public, through the city, to provide some public funds or in-kind services, we're in discussions about how that might be structured through an MOU. And other bids do things like ticket sales, merchandise sales. Sometimes they have friends of groups, and a DIF, which Rob and I and John have discussed, may be one opportunity for us in Brockton to begin to think about how the city might come into play with supporting this programmatic budget. Next slide, please. And this is a typical breakdown. This is one of the other bids in Massachusetts. They leverage, their bid fees represent about 66% of their budget. And you heard Chris, for those of you who were at the meeting with Worcester and Springfield, you heard Chris Russell talk about Springfield bids. About 60% of their budget comes from the fees that they gather through through their fee formula. And they have the remainder, the other 40% of their budget comes through a variety of different other ways, grants. They do a lot of sponsorship development because they do a lot of programming, event programming, and those kinds of things. So that's just an example. And I would encourage you to think about your bid budget and your fee structure and how the other resources you might want to bring into your bid. Next slide, please. So I'll pause there for a second, and that's sort of the walking through. Here's the universe. Here's our composition. Here's what we saw as priorities that have been identified so far. Now we're going to talk a little bit about how do we think about this fee structure and some scenarios along the way. Any questions so far? I can only see like 2 of you on my screen, so I can't tell.
I don't see anybody having a hand raised. Oh, Joe?
Hi, Joe.
Hi, Ann. Just in your experience, does this revenue stream and the mix of it change over time? Is there ability to attract more than just the fee structure at the early days of, sponsorship and grants?
Yes, there is. If you are I think the thing that I often struggle with most is that some of the communities are nervous about creating a budget that relies on other revenue streams, but and so they're very conservative about how they approach it. The 2 biggest elements certainly are going to be, whether your municipality is willing to financially participate in the bids, and most bids do. Their cities or towns financially participate either with cash or in-kind services. So that's a big question mark that you hope to solidify before as you're going through the process. And I expect that we will be able to do that here. The other major variables would be some of the grants you won't know about for sure, but you may have, if you have a big cultural aspect, let's say cultural programming, you may have a great relationship with your local arts council or others who traditionally like to invest in that kind of arts and cultural programming. You most likely would be able to access some of that. Or you may, like in Cambridge, they have a 1% for the art program. So they actually have a separate side grant agreement with the city to be the entity that executes a lot of their arts and cultural programming, because that's something the city also desired to do. So, it's something that I encourage bids from the get-go to think that way and to figure out, what else you can bring in to help leverage your bid fees, and also make that a big part of your discussion. What I find is over time, once you get your feet under the ground, people get much more skilled at looking for other opportunities. And there may be things that you really want as part of your plan, but that would be way outside of your resources available to execute. Let's say a streetscape improvement. That is most likely going to require the city going after other public money. And if that's an agreed upon part of your plan and the city is a part of that plan and they agree to that approach, they can actually go out and look for more public dollars that would support that kind of activity. So again, it depends on what your program is, and it also it depends on where those resources of other dollars are available. So that's the short and long answer. Is lots of times at the beginning, people are very cautious about how they look at this question, but I encourage you to think and to understand that most bids do leverage their fees out, and particularly as they get more mature, they get much more skilled at doing that. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so if there are no more questions, we'll keep going, and John and I will jump in and out here. So determining the fee structure. So could we, John, could you advance the slide? So there's no set formula. Every single fee structure in Massachusetts is different, and for every single bid. So you will determine this fee structure locally. The enabling legislation gives some suggested options, like linear front footage or gross square footage, building classification. But the most common way is to look at assessed value as a basis, because it's administratively simplest to handle. And sometimes they tie in back to classification of use or some way to tag back to how that assessed value looks like. And I can share, and I have shared every single bid structure or fee structure in Massachusetts, and each one of them is different. So you'll massage this to determine what you want to do in your own in your own district. So what we're going to talk about today is just using as an example assessed value. So next slide, please. And the other piece of this is that as part of your petition, you will need to articulate what you're going to you have to have a hardship provision. So most of the bids do you have to put this in your petition and to say, how will you deal with property owners that have significant financial hardship by being in the bid? And it's not a question of, I don't want to do this because I don't want to do this, but it's more, if a bid is established, are there specific things that you might want to consider to grant a waiver or reduction of fee for some period of time based on hardship? And typically it's a pretty high bar. So it could include things like bankruptcy, or let's say you're a commercial condo and you've lost your sole tenant. So extremely high vacancy rate, foreclosure or fire, or some extraordinary circumstance where you will want to work with your property owner to try to provide some relief under those individual circumstances. And that's something that you determine here as part of your petition. You will this will be a decision by your own board of directors to grant that request in terms of hardship. So just kind of keeping that in the back of your mind. Next slide, please. So assessed value scenarios. Next slide. John, you want to jump in and just and take a couple of these slides so
Absolutely.
You understand how we're approaching this. So John, I'm going to turn this over to you right now so you can talk about this.
Alrighty. So I did a little number crunching and took all the assessed values, since we decided that was the easiest to kind of figure out administratively. Some relatively simple math here. So for the 420 parcels that are the entire universe of bid properties, that totals out to $308 million in assessed value. Excuse me. Removing from that, so this total residential, commercial, and industrial assessed value, that removes any of the tax exempt properties and city-owned properties, and that assessed value takes us down to about 138 million. And of those, the average assessed value, actually, the entire universe average assessed value is 733,000, and that is the average by mean. And then the median assessed value, which is actually a lot more representative of what a particular property is, because there are some properties that are over 20 million, but the vast majority are under $500,000. So with the median assessed value, that is 233,000 for each property. So using that as an example property, forward myself to the next slide here.
I should just talk through that.
Yes, sorry. So
Next.
In the next slide, I'll show you that as an example. So this is just a little explainer of those different categories, that the total universe is all the parcels that are within the boundaries, regardless of their potential exemptions, their classification, their zoning, their use, etc. Like I said, the next removal would be the tax exempt and government owned parcels, which there are quite a few. And then, as I just explained, the average and median assessed values and why each one is kind of important. So this, again, is the universe of properties. Instead of using a pie chart, it was very complicated to understand. So I figured this is a bit easier representation. So this 307 represents the vast majority of properties, which are under $500,000. And as you can see, the lime green one down in the bottom right corner is the one property above 20 million. So that would have set all the averages way off. So hence are using the median. And so we use that average assessed value And then did a few different calculations. So in this scenario A, we used a 0.5% calculation on each property. And with that 0.5% assessment, the total fee that would be assessed, excuse me, pardon me, the total collection of the fee that would be assessed would be $692,000. And so for that average property, the annual fee would be $3,666, which comes out to about $300 a month. But the more representative median, you'd be looking at about $100 a month for each, for that average property, I should say. Next, so we then doubled that to a 1% scenario, which would yield us 1.38 million in budget. And for the average property per month, that would be about $600, and the median property would be just shy of $200. Few thousand for each, so for the year, a few $100s a month. That's my fault. So we took the average price of all those properties under $500,000, and I found their numerical average, their median. No, their mean. Sorry, I always confuse the two. And that number is $189,000. And so we use that as the statistical average of properties in the bid. And using that as our example, we did these three scenarios: 0.5%, 0.75%, and 1% assessment fees, and which would work out to a per month fee of $79, $118, or $158 to be a part of the bid.
I think we wanted just to pause there for a second. So I think a couple of important things to note. What would we figure out? 73%, around that amount,
Just shy of 74.
Properties within 74, just shy of 74% of the properties within this district have an assessed value of under $500,000. This $307. So that's important, because we're dealing with many small properties, parcels, and then we have on these little numbers in the lower right corner, you'll see you have a smaller number of outlier properties that are more highly valued, and that's not totally unusual. And so when we come to our next steps of what does this fee formula look like and how does that work, we want to understand what this means to the vast majority of the property owners, and also what it means for the larger, higher value properties. And typically, if that's the case in your community, and it's not unusual, when you develop your fee structure, you'll be thinking about how do you make it palatable for the smaller guys, but also for the larger people. And so typically what happens is, in a fee structure, you might see over a cap or over a certain amount that formula steps back for some of the larger property owners, so that, or in aggregate, some of the property owners that have an aggregated amount of properties that bump up the value, so that you'll be able to, once you slice and dice this, make some decisions about, do you take those those larger outlier properties and scale them back in terms of how that formula interacts with them, and then testing that out with those property owners. Is that palatable to you? Can you comfortably deal with that number? And then also on the other end, on the smaller properties, playing around with that number, that formula as well. So it's a balancing act, and that's why each one of these fee structures in each one of these districts in Massachusetts looks different, because you'll be making that determination yourselves.
How about questions?
Yep.
Well, is any questions about the scenarios that?
And this is just one scenario. We thought it would be important. It is important, because the question keeps coming up: how much is this going to cost? And so if you take scenario one, for the vast majority of the property owners, it's probably less than $100 a month to be able to buy into and be participating in that. in this and with that, you're going to purchase all of these things programmatically that you have laid out in your plan. So your dollars, so some of you, if you heard some of the conversations with some of the other bid directors that we've had, talks about that leveraging. You know, your dollar is leveraged out many times further because your, let's say $79 a month, you could not do hanging baskets throughout your district, marketing plans, you know, all of the kinds of activities that your dollars are leveraging out. And I know when you guys didn't go to Cambridge, but one of the property owners at Cambridge made the comment repeatedly that he felt that every dollar he invests is leveraged out $7, $8, or $9 more because of what they're purchasing.
So many of you on this call today are property owners. What's your temperature gauge on this?
So I'm gonna jump in because I actually had a question. I think many of us on this call are property owners, not of properties under 500,000. So if I understand the math correctly, you're taking a percentage of the assessed value. So the $20 million property that you took out of the numbers at that scenario 2 of 0.75%, are we saying that that property would be assessed $150,000 a year?
No.
Am I doing the math incorrectly?
Let me just do something.
That's what I came up with, Jonathan, so for what it's worth. Unless you scale it down.
Right,
again.
and it could be scaled back. So anything over, say, 10, $15 million gets a slightly smaller rate, you know.
I think it would need to be something
Right,
much
this is a
larger
very,
than slightly smaller because
Right,
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
so-
I chose poor
Yeah.
words there.
no, I understand, but I'm just, you know,
So if you were a $20 million property, and you would, if you said use 0.005 times your assessed value, yes, it would be $100,000 a year, just round numbers. However, that would not happen in your fee. This is just a scenario. This is but let's go to the next steps because that's kind of important.
Okay.
It is, but
It's a very
I,
simple
Wait,
scenario.
let me, it's the scenario is, that's if across the board, you were going to take that number. And most likely what you will do is to, in the next steps, go to the next slide, please. What will happen here next is that you will form, I would like you to form a subcommittee of this group, which would include large, small, and medium, like 4 or 5 people who are inclined to want to work on really kind of honing in on what would a fee structure look like here. Because you would certainly probably want to either cap how those larger properties come in or scale back in some way how those larger properties come in to make sure that you got a reasonable number. So that will impact your bottom line of what you can generate as a whole, but it's going to be considered what is fair and equitable and doable in your community. So Jonathan, your question is well taken, because yes, you're going to have some of those larger properties that you're probably not going to make that straight shot approach to things. You will want to adjust that as part of how you have this fee formula discussion. So this is just an example of how to think about how to approach this question in your community. That's why each one of these fee structures and each bid in Massachusetts looks different. So next steps, I would like to ask.
Can I ask you a quick question? In regards to, what you've seen in other communities, what's like a max that any individual parcel or property owner is paying, for example? Because, when I look at that number of 150,000, you even cut it in half and it's still beyond unreasonable, to be honest. So I'm wondering in other communities, what are, what's kind of a.
Well, I think it depends. Like in Springfield, there are 2 towers. Each one of them have a value of over.
In regards to a maximum.
Well, as again, each community is different. So in Springfield, you know, the two towers in Springfield, their bid fee is probably, you know, when we started, it was about $200,000 a year each. And believe me, those were calls that were made very early on. Is this something that you can do, Mass Mutual, for your tower, or Peter Pan bus lines for your tower? And they both agreed that it was. So that was part of the, how did you come up with this fee structure? In Springfield, I'll use it as an example because it was the very first one we did. Their fee structure it's really a very, they have a lot of buildings that have a lot of square feet that have a lower assessed value, but a lot of square feet, and they're Class B and C office space. So any property owner in Springfield in the district that has a property that's over 50,000 square feet can choose between a calculation based on square footage or assessed value. And so what happened is the larger properties, you know, they made their choice. Those middle Class B and C office buildings that had a lot of space but a lower assessed value, they made their choice of which direction they wanted to choose. And then under a certain, under 50,000 square feet, it was based on assessed value. So their fee formula really tried to be reflective of the kinds of properties that they had and the size of properties that they had. So that's how their fee formula looked. And in Cambridge, they have, you know, like huge buildings, that biotech buildings that are valued at $140 million. You know, their formula steps back dramatically if you get over a certain size based on assessed value, so that their number is much is brought down and more palatable for them. So again, this is a conversation that happens locally. You will determine, you could cap it at X. You know, you can either cap it, you can scale it back, you can take whatever approach seems to make the most sense for you. We're just suggesting one way to look at it. And so my suggestion to you is that we identify a handful of people from this larger group who might sit down with me and John and really try to work out some different scenarios in terms of this fee structure and then we can test that out with different size property owners to see, you know, how that works for them, bearing in mind that you have a budget that you're also going to be thinking about and what you want to achieve. So that's kind of the next steps here. So I'm going to walk you through these next steps and we can go back to that, but form that subcommittee to work with me and to work with John on different fee scenarios that could be presented to the larger group.
Okay, I'm just going to come out and say this bluntly. You know, I get where you're coming with this, but, you know, for example, you know, a 2 market rate developments downtown, we have a tax increment exemption agreement. That's one of the many ways we're able to structure this. The profit margins are not so extreme. So, for example, I have a third, you know, development we have online, you know, and if I have an assessed value of 15 million between those 3 properties, that means $75,000 a year in, you know, bid taxes at 0.05%. Now, I understand that could be modified down, but, you know, at least what I'm doing, you know, to lose $75,000 means the developments don't work. So, you know, however this is put together, I guess I would like to be on, you know, the committee that designs this, because I don't want to see myself put in a situation where, you know, at the end I'm going against this, because essentially there's nothing left. You know, the value in us doing the developments leaves zero left for us. You know,
yeah, Jeffrey, I think that would be,
sounds probably harsh, but
if you would, if you would
$75,000 at 0.05%.
yeah,
right
no,
now, that's not okay with me under any circumstances.
Yeah, no, I get it. So that's why I would love to have you on this committee, and as well as anybody else who would, you know, I think it's better if there is a smaller committee that and include you, Jeff. I would love to have you on this committee, and a couple of a few other people who would, let's really work on what are the scenarios that would be palatable for the broadest number of property owners, that make sense for the larger guys as well as the smaller guys, mindful of what else, how does that impact our what we want to do in terms of a budget, and what other resources can we bring to the table. So that's our next step. So Jeff, please, if you're willing to spend some time on this discussion, that would be extremely helpful, because certainly you can't do it unless it's workable for all different kinds of property owners within this district. So if you're willing
Joffrey-
to be there,
Joffrey,
I would love to have you.
Joffrey, if I could just intercede, because it's, that is the purpose of this task force, right? This is so we can make sure that these items are in fact, blunt or not blunt, however it is, it's important that the conversations, and you've been on this committee and have been listening, and so thank you for sharing your concerns, and as Ann said, to have you volunteer to be on that subcommittee. Others, Ted, Jonathan, Vronsky, Chris, Joe.
I don't want to speak out of turn, but Ann, we had mentioned that there could be diff considerations.
Yeah,
I'm
so let
wondering,
me-
so
yeah.
that I'm wondering if that could be a thing, because any, properties that are developed with diff in mind, that may have to, could have to and or could be taken into account in the, the fee
Yeah,
assessment.
that's why I'd kind of like to walk through these other next steps, because they do play into this budget, this fee discussion. So we're in the process of getting some better numbers, that are realistic in terms of budget scenarios. We are talking to the city about their MOU, and that MOU includes, what are the basic current levels of services that are sort of your baseline services, so that these investments are enhancements, not something that's replacing anything that's there, but also potentially
What
how
does
the city
MOU stand
might,
for? Sorry.
pardon me,
What does MOU stand for?
a memorandum of understanding with the
Okay.
city. So what that would include, and I can't really see who's talking. So this, Jonathan, I think it's you. That would include, or whoever asked that question, what that would include is a description of the baseline services that the city does and will continue to provide, so that these services that you're investing in or programs that you're investing in are enhancements. That's what this bid buys. And then also, not only the relationship, the MOU will describe the relationship with the city and the bid, the baseline services, and then how the city participates as a property owner part of this bid. And what we are discussing with the city could come in the form of a financial contribution, which could be part of a diff. It could be, and it's proposed that it's part of a diff, and that may play into, or will play into, this fee structure and this budget consideration. So we are working on that MOU right now, and having discussions with the city about what might that look like. And then the next thing is also to think about what other monetary in-kind services sponsorships should play into this budget, and then the hardship provisions. But those are our next steps here. We need a working committee to play around with these budget considerations, the different fee scenarios, and also, what we might also be able to bring in as other resources into this, as that will affect what that fee structure also looks like. So what we're trying to do is to make this a whole budget that's sustainable, and brings in as many other resources that we can, including a partnership with the city, and then come up with a fee structure that is palatable to the property owners that are there. So that's the work. That fee structure committee is something that I am asking you to set up. I'd like 4 or 5 people on it of varying sizes of property owners who can help work with me and John on this discussion, and we can present it back to this larger group. So that's our next steps. And again, I'm always really reluctant to throw a scenario out, because then people in their mind get that scenario locked in,
And Chris
and
has
that's not where we are.
Chris has a question.
Yep, Chris.
Yeah, and it was very helpful to have the bid directors come to Brockton and to explain to us the different scenarios that they played out in their communities. I think it might be nice to have a step further. I'd love to see a comparative analysis. I know we've talked about some of the different cities and how they started and what it grew to. And what I mean by that is, some of the services a la carte that they focused in on or started, purchasing early on, like maybe snow removal. Because I think in looking at items like that, you can factor what you're currently spending on snow removal in your and kind of understand that there's an economies of scale if
Right.
Everyone's contributing to it, and also convenience factor, because you're not all hiring separate people to remove the snow in front of your place at 6 a.m., that there might be some
Yeah.
benefit to that. So that I don't know if there's any reduced insurance or any other benefits to having a bid, whether there's other discounts or savings that occur. But it would really be interesting to see the budgets of a couple of these bids to see what they're spending on snow removal. What are they
Sure.
spending on police details and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so Chris, or John, can you take the slideshow down so we can see everybody, because I can't really see anybody. I think that's we can certainly do that. I can share, we can talk, as we programmatically, you guys have focused on certain things. One of the things that's happening right now is that we're trying to get some better numbers around some of the clean and safe activities from vendors who can actually, it's not a quote, but it's a good, I can tell you what they are, but it's a pretty good estimate because they have done it in other places in Massachusetts. So they can look at our district, look at the order of magnitude, and we're trying to get some numbers in that. Rob and John have been talking to a couple of the national vendors and also a local vendor about some of those numbers. But I have the bid, I can give you the bid budgets for all of the bids in Massachusetts, all of the bids that we have in Massachusetts. And we can sort of drill down on that as part of this conversation, because I can tell you if you want to do ambassadors or cleaning ambassadors or snow removal, what that's probably going to cost you. A range. It's not because you would put an RFP out, certainly, and get a real quote on those things. But it may very well, there may be some economies of scale. Some of the bids do things like shared dumpsters. If your dumpster contracts are up, and if you're doing something and you're doing it across the whole district, you may have some economies of scale in doing that. Certainly as it comes to marketing and advertising, you're going to have economies of scale. If you're going to try to market something or promote or do a joint marketing program, you're going to have a much better, bigger media buy and be able to carry those dollars a lot further than any one property owner could do on their own. So I can show you the budgets of all of the bids and what they spend their money on. And we will do that as part of this, sort of budgeting process, as well as, and you can choose what your priorities are. So, this is the sausage making piece of this project where and so I don't want anybody to take these are just scenarios that we're showing you how our thought process works as we think through, what you could consider and what that might mean. So yes, you have bigger, larger properties we need to take into consideration and figure out what the right solution is for those properties that are palatable. But also, what does this mean for the 307 little property or smaller property owners? Can they deal with this kind of a number? And what does that buy them? So it's on both ends of the scale.
Just one follow-up. I wonder if, based on the number of years that bids have been in Massachusetts, if there's any data that correlate increased valuations.
Oh yeah, there's a lot. Well, I don't have it in one spot, but we have made presentations to the state through Secretary Keneally's office. All of the bids, we've come together and talked about the impacts, in terms of their values of their properties, their vacancy
That would be
rates.
great to have. So let's
Pardon me?
see that would be great to have. I think that's what Chris was getting to.
Yeah, yes. Again, it's going to depend on, city by city, but yeah, we did a presentation a couple of years ago around vacancy. So not every bid collects all of this stuff in a standardized way. So we made a presentation, the bids all presented, and what that meant. So in some communities, it meant all of them had numbers around vacancy rates. All of them showed major progress in terms of reducing the number of vacancies within their districts. All of them showed increased assessed values. I mean, bids have been around literally for over 60 years across the country, and they're very much a part of the landscape. So you can do, every community is different. So there's not one set answer to that, but in Massachusetts, I can pull some information, from the bids and from the presentations we made, as briefings to to the administration around the impact that bids have had in their communities, and it's pretty
Yep.
significant.
That would
They've
be
shown-
helpful.
They've
That would
shown
be helpful.
decreased vacancies, they've showed increased property values, over time by, once they've had them, and they've showed their ability to withstand sort of economic upturns and downturns in the real estate market, as well as impacts around COVID. So there is some history.
Thanks.
Some of these
And
bids are over
Not
20.
not to cut you short, only because I know I'm going to be losing people in about 5 minutes, and I've got Vronsky with a question and Joffrey. So just to summarize, you have access to pull that comparative analysis together. That would be helpful.
Mary, that's not something that's readily available, but I can go back and try to find some
That would be
information
great.
from some of these presentations to
Okay.
be able to share with people. I mean, I don't have it at my fingertips right this second,
No,
but
no,
we
no.
have done those kinds of briefings before.
Right. I don't think that's what Chris was asking for it to be done today, but I think the idea of that, if there's a presentation or, if I'll contact Secretary Keneally himself too and see if he has that. I mean, however it is, anyway. Vronsky, if you have a question?
Yes. Obviously, I have what I'm trying to understand here. I mean, we're talking about the fee structures here. Is it something that's going to be through some sort of membership, or is it going to be through taxations, or is it voluntary? I'd like to understand a little bit more of this here.
So the way a bid is formed is that this committee will have it's actually formed through a petition process. Once you figure out the budget, the program, the fee structure, the hardship provisions, all of that becomes a package. That petition needs to be supported by 60% of the property owners within the district that represent 51% of the assessed value. If that threshold is met, and most bids try to achieve a little bit more than that, maybe they go up to 65%, some try to get higher, to show that there is consensus that this is something that would be positive for their districts, then that goes to a public hearing and then a vote of the city council. Once the bid is formed, everybody who is part of that, everybody participates according to the fee structure. And so for those that, that again, that's not worked out yet. And then every 5 years, the property owners within the district take a vote to decide to either continue the bid or to retire it. So it's really a 5-year window. A bid, if it's not working, can be taken apart at any time, by a reverse petition of 50% of the property owners. So that's the 30,000-foot view of the world of how that works. And I'm happy to talk to you further about that and provide more detail on that.
So if I understand that, if you outside of that of the diagram that you just posted here, as far as like for businesses, so you're exempt from the fee structure of the bid. Is that
If
correct?
you're outside of the boundaries, you would not be receiving. This is very geographically specific. So the services and the programs, the activities that the bid decides are part of your plan and you're investing in are there within that district. So there's to benefit those properties and everybody who uses this district as a visitor, as a customer, as a resident, as an investor. Those are within this district. If you're not within the area, this doesn't affect you at all because you are not deriving benefit from it directly.
Joffrey has a
Thank you.
question. Thank you, Vronsky.
Yeah, thank you. So quick question. I'm just curious, has a fee structure ever been put in place based on parcel size as opposed to value? For example, you might have, a small parcel with a, property that has significant value, but then you could have, a single family home that has, 3 times the parcel size. Again, I know that's, probably not the case here, but
Yeah,
what about
well,
parcel size as a means of, valuation for coming up with a structure?
You can do it any way you want, and certainly, that parcel size is a consideration. I think that, like we frequently have done different scenarios in different ways, and we find out that you kind of get to a similar number. So you could be, like some places do. First of all, I would recommend that you would exempt any small residential properties from your fee formula. That's what most bids do, and I think it just makes the most sense. So, but you can do it based on square footage. You can do it on parcel size. You can do it, and sometimes bids take the approach of, if it's a commercial property, it's at X. If it's a residential property, it's at Y. Their fee structure might have a differential in it. So so that could be like, if you're and I'll use an example. And in a lot of places, maybe a commercial component, if it's a mixed use property, that the commercial component might be 0.00, I'm going to pick a number, 3 times your assessed value, and the residential component might be 0.001. So that you take that into consideration. So again, what I just laid out for you today is just one way to think about this. There are many ways that you can think about this that make sense in your community. And that's why we're going to work on this in a subcommittee approach. We can play around with different scenarios.
Okay.
So you can do it any way you want if in the end of the day, your group decides this is fair and equitable for the property owners within your district.
So I think the only reason we crunched the numbers like that was because we very often got the question, what is this going to cost? And honestly, we had no way to say anything to anybody about what it might cost. At least we just wanted to get at least somewhere in the ballpark so that people had some idea of what they may be, not obligated, but what they may be looking at paying into the bid. This is not representative of any one scheme that we're thinking of. It's just trying to get some numbers on the page.
Rob may use the example, like if you were, your 300 parcels in this district that are of this size, relatively speaking, is it worth for you? Could it be worth to you to spend $100 a month to purchase all of these activities? And because, does this make sense? And again, we know there are larger property owners that are outliers in this conversation that you will need to address as part of a fee structure that makes sense. Is there a cap on that? Does it, how does that work? So that all comes into play. But it does give you an order of magnitude to say, if I wanted to generate a budget just from the fees alone, not what we can get from, participation by the municipality through a DIF or some other kinds of way, or grants or other kinds of things. If we wanted to generate a budget of around $300,000, $500,000, whatever it is, these are how some of these scenarios might play out. So again, we're very early in this discussion. There's nothing set in stone here. This was just an example of how to approach this. And I think that it hopefully gives you a little bit of a sense of how we might think about this conversation.
I personally thought it was super helpful. And I'm thinking about, selling this thing, right? What's the smaller guy? What's the biggest guy? And how to package it, and just getting a sense of the breakdown of the like you said, the 300, majority. That was super helpful to know. So I just wanted to say I appreciate the work.
Thanks, Cindy.
And it had to start somewhere, just to John's point, right?
Exactly.
So there isn't a right answer. It really just takes a conversation. And so I know Joffrey said that he is interested. It was last Thursday, John Marion happened to be in the office for another meeting. So he sat in on this presentation. He wasn't able to make it today, but he said he was interested in sitting and participating. I know, I would think, it's just from some of your conversations. So John and Ann, when's the subcommittee meeting going to be?
Well, I need to figure out who wants to participate in this discussion. I mean,
Well, not everybody's
Joffrey,
on it, but
we'll reach out, and I'd like to get 4 or 5 people.
So Ted Carmen, just because we're running out of time. So Ted Carmen, Joffrey said he was interested. John Marion said he was. Anybody else?
Joffrey, will you do that?
Yeah, I feel like I have no choice.
Nope, love to have you. I mean, this is important to have you part of this conversation.
Again, it's time, right? You guys are already on these meetings every other week, and now
Well,
it's another subcommittee. But let me just finish for 1 second, because your time is valued, and I want to make sure that you all know that, right? I get paid. Well, I don't get paid to be on this meeting. I'm a property owner along with all of you. It's important, and while Joe stepped off, Joe and John are both the co-chairs, and they both had messaged me separately to say, again, the appreciation for all of you for being on this. So that piece is really important, and to continue to move this forward, to work on the groundwork that both John and Ann put together will be important that it continues. So Vronsky, I don't know if you have time.
Yes, yes, I'd love to.
Great. Well, that's a great,
Thanks.
great start. If anybody wants to think about this and wants to join in on this conversation, we will welcome you. Again, this is one way to think about it. I encourage you to go online and look at some of the other bids in Massachusetts, and on their websites, you're going to be able to see all the things that they do, and this will be helpful for you, I think, to understand them. So, look at the different bids. I have information on all their budgets and their size and who else they have, participating and the services that they provide. And again, I want you to think about this. This isn't like putting money into a pot that goes into the city and the city then decides what you're going to do with this. This is deciding what you want to do, figuring out what resources are available to do it. And these are enhancements that you are purchasing to directly benefit your district and your properties and tenants and anybody who uses this district. And it's just a vehicle to do that. So if you're very much worried about enhanced clean and safe programs, and you really want to do some activities that do this, or you want to increase more activation, or you feel that you want to do this marketing stuff, these are things that you're putting together. And the programmatic areas that I laid out at the beginning of this presentation are the things that we heard from you and all of the people who have responded to the surveys, the focus groups, the public participation that we've done thus far. These are the buckets that they're falling into. So the details around those buckets are things that you work out. So every single programmatic area of every single district is different because you determine it locally.
Okay, if there are no others, great. Both John and I have put just a general in the chat just about what bids again, but then there's also the association. Again, that is research on your part. I think if I would say the Commonwealth, and maybe this is to Amanda from Mass Development, particularly, or if the secretary, if these are going to be further provided, it may behoove to have those questions that have been asked from this group about comparative analysis. And I'm not saying that you do it, Ann. I'm just talking.
No, I'm saying, Mary, I'm going to clarify something. This is a private organization.
I understand.
The Commonwealth is not going to have, you can call Secretary of Community. He's not going to have this information for you.
I understand that, Ann. What I guess is saying that there's encouragement by the secretary. I wasn't saying that he's going to have the list. If this is being encouraged by the Commonwealth, and I think it is, as an alternative way, right? And so all I'm saying is that it's great to have a list of all the folks, and then we've got 22 people now calling 13 bids. It's just a little bit difficult to do that. And I just would say, anybody, all of you can do what you want to do in terms of doing your own research. And as Ann suggested, I do not have the time to pull this together either as DBA or OCPC or anything, but it would probably be helpful and start looking at that comparative analysis. So
I'm happy to get the information for you and put this together for you. But you can, if you want and you have the interest, you can look on the bid websites to just get a better sense of a feel of what these bids are doing. They have a lot of pictures, they have a lot of information, but I have all of their budgets. I know what they spend their money on. I'm happy to share all of that as we go through this process with you, if that's helpful. I think that the bid directors meet every other week. If you wanted to do some conversation with them on a panel, I can get them to participate or can get the information for you to share with you. Bear in mind, these are private entities. You will be a private entity. You're not part of government. You are a separate nonprofit running your district.
great, thank you.
If anybody has any questions, you all know how to reach me. I'm happy to have a conversation. I just put my email, my phone number in there, and please reach out.
Trafi, you have a question?
Yeah, this is probably a little too forward, but just out of curiosity, how is the money collected? If this is a private entity and not enforceable by
So
the
the-
municipality, and then
Yes,
how is it
the-
managed?
The money is, the way it works, the enabling legislation, once a bid is officially formed, the city actually bills and on the tax bill and collects the bid fee and passes it over to the bid entity. It's formed as a 501c. It's illegal. It has articles of organization. It's run by a board of directors from you to do the governance of this district. The bid fee is then passed to the bid in its entirety for the execution of your plan.
And who does the bookkeeping and, managing of, I guess, financial,
The bid
finances?
does an audit, is mandated to do they have their own, usually the bid board of directors will have a finance committee, and the bid will manage the resources that they have available to them. They do an audit. They have to do a financial audit and file it with the state every year as part of being a nonprofit, and they will communicate to all your property owners. You guys form your own board of directors and have the governance and the fiduciary responsibility for this organization.
Okay, that's a later point in time.
Yeah, I mean, that's how the enabling legislation specifically says that the municipality will bill and collect the bid fee and then pass it to the bid for them to execute on their plan.
And what about enforcement of non-compliance? What if someone says, I'm not paying it?
So if somebody says they're not paying it, typically the bid will work with the property owner to see if they're eligible for a hardship. And if that is not the case, then the bid will will lien a property that stands behind the municipal lien. If the property owner hasn't paid their fee. And typically what the bids have seen across the Commonwealth over the last 20 some years of bids being in existence is that the collection tracks pretty much similar to what the city's collection rate for taxes are. So if you typically collect 97% of your taxes within a district, the bids typically track along that same line. And again, they're renewed every 5 years by the property owners. If you don't want to renew it, that bid will go away. Or if you're deciding after a year or two that you don't like this bid, you can reverse petition to dissolve the bid.
Well, that's
Bronski?
not so simple, but.
Yes, I have a quick question. I mean, isn't that a bit redundant with what the Downtown Brockton Redevelopment Authority and the DBAs are doing? I mean, I'm really confused a little bit.
Basically, you're creating a vehicle through which you are purchasing these supplemental programs and services that you have designed and you think will be beneficial to your properties and your tenants and anybody who uses the downtown. The business association is a business association, so the bid is created by the property owners themselves and the city in partnership. The redevelopment authority is a public entity with certain responsibilities. The bid doesn't typically do what a redevelopment authority doesn't take properties. It doesn't sell properties like a redevelopment authority is. The DBA, the business association, primarily is around businesses and in the programs and activities that they may want to accomplish. Mary, do you want, and a lot of times, just to answer your question, the last two bids have been formed growing out of a business association. So the Central Square Business Association transformed into a bid, and the Newmarket Business Association transformed into a bid, which gave them greater bandwidth, more resources, greater participation of property owners, and a bigger impact in their district. But they grew out of business associations.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right. There would be a subcommittee be formed, and before that gets formed, and I'm going to make sure that everybody else on the email will have that opportunity to sign up if there's someone in there that would like to join. And otherwise, this will be recorded. I'll share the recording out and we will see everybody in 2 weeks.
And again, anybody, I encourage you, I hear some questions that kind of were covered probably in earlier presentations that maybe if you're joining in now, there's a need to sort of do a little bit more orientation on the concept or conversation around some questions you might have. I am more than happy to have those conversations. Please give me a call or an email. I'm happy to catch people up if they're new to this committee or just have further thoughts that they want to talk about individually. I'm happy to spend the time doing that if that's easier for you.
Thanks, everyone, for your time. Thanks, John and Ann, for the presentation. That was great.
Yes, thank you.